Hi everyone, my name is Nicole Lamar and this is my Module 14 case study. The summary of the case. Mr. Inman is the assistant principal who has been notified that James passed something to David in the hall. When called to the office, James admitted that he threatened David into taking the brass knuckles. The officer arrested both boys on the fact that both were in possession of the knuckles and it was per district policy. The district policy says that both boys should be expelled and entered into the DAEP program and expelled for no less than 45 days. Mr. Inman called both mothers. James's mom said to have him sit in the youth detention center, and David's mom ran to get him. Mr. Inman filled out paperwork on James but did not for David because of his reputation, because David was an honor student and had no prior incidences. And then a week later, Mr. Inman was told by the director of secondary education that he needed to fill out the paperwork or he would be written up. Any legal or ethical issues? Students were not physically harmed, but David was emotionally hurt when he was threatened to take the brass knuckles and when he went to the youth detention facility. A law was violated by bringing the brass knuckles to school with the intent to harm. That law is you have to bring a weapon with the intent to commit a crime. I think that Mr. Inman did breach his contract even though he was doing what was best for his students. Mr. Inman was acting on the best interest of both students based on past history and the confession of James. My one sentence, just to kind of summarize it, was Mr. Inman made an ethical decision to not write up David when David had the weapon because James had threatened him, and James confessed to. Kind of an overall about the facts. The people of this case were Mr. Inman. He is a male assistant principal. He wants to do the right thing in regards to David. He tries to help students from the South Side since he came from there, and he was continuing to build those relationships by staying after school and playing basketball with them. David's a 13-year-old honor student who is in band, and he was scared of James's threat. James is a 15-year-old male who has been in trouble in the past. He has been in the youth detention facility before. David's mother, very worried about her son. She quickly got to the school and the youth detention center to get him, and she was very concerned about how it would affect his future. And James's mother, on the other hand, not worried at all. She actually hung up on Mr. Inman, and she left her son in the youth detention center just for a little bit. And then there's the police officer. From what I gathered, he's a male officer, and he was just doing his job, and per district policy, both boys had to go to the youth detention center per district policy about having a weapon on school grounds. Places that took place were Rocket Junior High. This is where the incident took place. It seems to be a suburban public school with about 900 students. The second place was the youth detention facility, and that's where both boys were taken after they were handcuffed at school. And then their programs were the DAEP program, the District Disciplinary Alternative Education Program, where you go after you get like an incident referral. And then there's the general education courses at the junior high. Review and prioritize the information. I think that if the assistant principal were to be let go, it would cause a lot of damage to the community and to stakeholders. That's someone who is a leader of the school, and to have him removed would change the whole dynamics of the school. This decision could also affect David by giving him a record, which could cause issues getting into college or trade school if he chooses. And even sometimes finding a job can be hard if you have a record. It could also affect Mr. Inman because he will get written up for not following policy, which could in turn cause him to lose his job depending on if he does it often. I would like to know more about the exact verbiage in the district policy that discusses weapons at school. I know it said zero tolerance, but what other verbiage was in there to make that decision? Was there any leeway or a loophole or anything in the contract? I think I also would like to know a little bit more about each kiddo. How is David? What other things has James done? Is this his first weapons incident? Things like that. I would also like to know the teacher's full story. What did she or he actually see? And if there's any video cameras that caught the incident that we could review. The options and possible consequences. I came up with 4. The first one is Mr. Inman would not take any action against either boy. He would get written up and it would be put into his file. And James could see this as a possible free pass and continue to do the same actions and not learn anything from it. Mr. Inman, the second one is Mr. Inman would follow the district's policy for weapons and both boys would go to the alternative program and be expelled for no less than 45 days. Mr. Inman, the third one is Mr. Inman sends James into the alternative program and expel him for no less than 45 days. He could also not write up David and just let it go since the weapon wasn't his, and James also confessed. And the last option I came up with was Mr. Inman could send James into the alternative program and expel him for no less than 45 days. And Mr. Inman could make David complete some community service because he was found with the weapon. Even though it wasn't his fault, it could be a consequence for David. Some of the pros and cons. For the first option I had was, the pro was David would remain at school and continue his honor classes. James would also remain at school and continue classes. Mr. Inman could continue to work on building a relationship with James and in turn even build a relationship with David as well. Cons, Mr. Inman could be written up. James may not learn a lesson at all from it. And James may continue with the same behaviors. Pros for number 2. District policy would be followed. Mr. Inman would not get a write-up. Cons would be David could have his future ruined for taking the weapon. Mr. Inman could be seen as a person who cares more about the policy than his students. Pro for option 3 was David would be able to continue his honor program at the school, but Mr. Inman looked out for David's best interest. So he, was looking out for his kids. And the cons would be for number 3, Mr. Inman would be written up, and it would be hard for Mr. Inman to continue building a relationship with James because James will be at another building in the different program. And James could feel like he was getting punished and David didn't get any consequences, even though David was the one being threatened. And the last option, pro, is David would still be able to continue his honor program. Cons, again, James would be removed from the school and Mr. Inman could not build that relationship. James could again feel like he was getting punished and David was not. Even with community service, he could feel like that David was not getting punished like he was for the same incident, even though James threatened David. The option that I feel would be best was the last option that I came up with. So I think that James should go to the alternative program and be expelled for no less than 45 days. David will continue to be at Rocket Junior High and continue his honor classes and complete some community work for being in possession of the weapon. I think that this shows that both boys had some form of a consequence for having the weapon, but it also has the best interest for both boys related to their past experiences, as James is a repeat offender and David, this is really his first time ever being in serious trouble. Here are kind of the steps that I came up with to implement my decision. The first one is I would talk to both David and James about their consequences and why I made that decision. I'm not going to talk about, David to James and James to David, but what is their consequence? Why did I choose it for them? Number 2, I would talk with both sets of parents about the incident and the consequences for their child, not the other child again. They don't need to know what's going on with the other child. It's not theirs. Step 3, I would talk to the admin of the alternative education program about James and what kind of things he needs to do to get back into Rocket Junior High as far as working on character building and stuff like that to get him back into the general education program. Last step would be to help David set up community service, try to build that relationship with him and discuss with him how many hours he is required to do. So really making sure that he understands that this is not a good thing, but he's not in serious trouble because it technically wasn't his fault. And then the conclusion, I think that having to choose between ethics and policy can be very hard. It may result in sometimes getting in trouble or written up ourselves, but I would still rather myself get in trouble than a student if it was not the student's fault and it was in their best interest. So if they're an innocent party, I don't want them to be punished for something that they really didn't have any control over, or they were super intimidated that they just couldn't feel like they could stand up to that person. So I'd rather get myself in trouble and, let them, have their consequence not be as bad as what it should be per policy. And that is all I have. Thank you very much.